Wednesday, the 27th of the 8th, 2025. The time is 25 minutes to 11. That means the latest and greatest in F1 news. There are very many F1 centric threads as always. We'll talk about Cadillac F1. So too, we'll talk about the F1 movie now streaming, highest grossing movie of Brad Pitt's career. Techie. We'll talk about Alpine. We'll talk about Pierre Gasly saying that the sky isn't even the limit for the one that they call Fabio Briatore. So too, we'll talk about Oscar Jack Piastri. He's had some things to say, keys to win the championship in 2025. So too, we'll talk about Lewis. There's been a Brembo employee coming out and talking about why that dude is struggling. So too, in the final instance, your main event, Andrew Benson's delivered a god tier article. Again, all F1 journals are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. And he's talked about very extensively an expose per se on Sir Lewis Hamilton's woes. In the first instance, let me show you this. This is interesting now, because lest we forget, it's a Dutch Grand Prix this weekend, a track around which in Zandvoort, Maximilian Verstappen doesn't fare too badly if past his prologue. 4 podiums from 4 starts, 3 wins, 3 pole positions. I have, 200 laps led. In stark contrast, something of a juxtaposition, the odds makers, by dint of the RB21 and its not insubstantial multitudinous foibles of the aerodynamic variety, have Maximilian Verstappen as a rank outsider to win the Dutch Grand Prix this weekend. 9-1. 10% of the time if you run 100 simulations. Similar odds for qualifying over humanity. In the second instance, let me tell you, the talk of the town is all about Checo and Valtteri Bottas. Experience, I mean, can you spell experience? 527 races between the two of them, 281 for Checo, 246 for Valtteri, 16 race wins, 23 pole positions, 106 podiums, 3,000 even, 435 points between them. Experience isn't something they want for, but yet and still the community are doing one of these. Hang on, surely there are better, younger, hungrier F1 peddlers that you could have appointed to that role. Mention no names: Felipe Drugovich, Teo Pourchaire et al. Oh, and by the way, this is a nice picture, right? It's going to become the battle of the number 2 drivers in 2026 for Cadillac F1. I've got Valtteri, I'll be honest with you, by dint of a couple of different things, but not least of which are this. Checo Perez has come out and he's already contradicting himself. In the first instance, he said, you know what, I've got nothing to prove. You can see Liam Lawson, you can see Tsunoda-san and their performance, that there is something about that number 2 car at Red Bull that you don't get the upgrades, that it's Max Verstappen's team. Ergo, they build the car in his image and the second driver will always struggle. Because of that, therefore, Checo Perez says, I've got nothing to prove. And then he says this: I couldn't afford to leave F1 the way I left the sport last year, and this is why I'm coming back with this new project. Contradiction in terms any Checo Perez. And then you've got this. There's a couple of other things I want to touch on. There's been interviews given by Checo and Valtteri Bottas. They're the brand new Cadillac F1 drivers. Cringe-worthy interviews. I would pull it up, but I'm allergic. In the interview, they said that the interviewer said to Checo Perez, asked as his starting question, You guys are super quick. You drive these cars at a gazillion miles an hour. Does that mean then that you do everything quick, even outside of the track? Do you have to think quickly? I'm like, what are we doing here? This is the footballification, the drive to survive McDonaldization of Formula One, where you get these mainstream appearances and these mainstream interviewers have never watched an F1 race in their life. Oh, and by the way, to that point, the F1 movie has now gone streaming on Apple TV. $600 million grossing. 600 million. That's the highest grossing movie of Brad Pitt's career, nailing World War Z. And again, that speaks to the growing popularity, the extent to which attention dollars are being spent globally in growth markets and other on the weird and wacky world, the sporting endeavour that we call the one that F's. Oh, and by the way, if we're talking about Cadillac F1, the rumour was that potentially they were in for Christian Horner. Well, Christian Horner and Checo Perez at one team again. I don't think neither one of Christian or Checo Perez would like that. But Cadillac F1 CEO Dan Tauris has kiboshed that, shut it down out of hand. He told the race that no talks have taken place with Christian Horner and there are no plans to hold them. That's techie. I thought Christian Horner would be a good fit for Cadillac F1. I did. I mean, he's a swashbuckling pioneer of a team principle, a get-it-done guy, the likes of which we've rarely seen in Formula One. That would leave one door of opportunity open, therefore, for Christian Horner if he's interested in coming back as an equity guy, and that would be Alpine. Flavio Briatore, though, executive advisor of Alpine, per Pierre Gasly, has no intention of stepping down. So maybe the probability of that transpiring isn't as material as some think. Here's what Pierre Gasly said, speaking about Flavio Briatore in a way that was effusive in terms of its praise. He says, I must say the media probably knows Flavio and has more stories than I, because I only really got to know Flavio over the course of the last year. You need some time to open up and understand each other's personalities. At the start, it was all track focused. However, the more that we worked together, says Pierre Gasly, we created a stronger bond, and now we have started to know a bit more about each person and how we act. He invited me onto his boat and I spent some time with him, and it's good to see what his vision is, what he wants from the team. He's been a very successful businessman and has a lot of experience in Formula One, but also outside of F1. He's a true leader, no kidding, Sherlock. Do you know what I mean? A get it done guy. He will stop at no length to if there's advantage, he will get it, even if he has to bend/break a rule. Mention no names, Crashgate. Gasly bookends his statement, his soliloquy this way: he's really committed to Formula One and the team to put Enstone back on top, as he did some years ago. Mention no names, Crashgate. And obviously things have evolved, but he's very much aware of that and he wants to make it happen. He's putting the work in. The question then, my supposition is this: can Christian Horner and executive advisor Flavio Briatore exist in the same space? I would argue not. Flavio was brought on to bring the asset value up of Alpine. Suffice to say that they wanted to sell it at some point in a not too distant future. I'm not sure that they keep him and get Christian Horner, especially not in 2026. Oh, and by the way, OJP, Oscar Piastri, there's been a lot of talk in the summer break about the competitiveness or the lack thereof as far as 26. It is a bit too polite, a bit too after you, Claude, as far as OJP and Lando Norris are concerned. Will that continue in the second half of the season as it becomes eminent, very, very clear that one of the two are going to win a championship of the drivers' variety? Well, we'll see over the next 10 races. However, there is a growing trend. Every time I hear Oscar Piastri talk, there's a couple of things that he speaks about, a thread that runs through all of his stanza and soliloquy, and it looks something like this. He talks about pressure, he talks about consistency, and he talks about speed. He thinks that he will win the championship at the altar of a combination of those three. In his latest interview with McLaren.com, he said, as he did a couple of weeks ago during a press conference, when asked, are you going to win this thing because of speed or consistency? He said it's a homologation of the two, that there is a line of best fit. If you're consistently slow, then you will win nothing. If you're consistent, if you're quick, but yeet it into the barrier, as did Lando Norris at Saudi Arabia, Jeddah Corniche, then you won't be able to accrue the points requisite to win yourself a championship. Touche, sir. Per Murray Walker, to finish first, you must first finish. Oscar Piastri in the interview, his latest one with McLaren.com, said, in F2, I managed to piece all of those puzzles together. I was consistent and quick up until that point. Erstwhile in F3, I'd been quick but inconsistent. To win in F1, I need to replicate for my form in F2 and be consistently quick. He talks too about the pressurized circumstance. Says, yeah, there was a bit of pressure in H1, but in H2, when all the chips are down, when we're playing for keeps, that's when it's going to become more pressurized. And I think Lando needs to be reading these these quotes and statements from Oscar Piastri and taking heed, because it will become more pressurized and he will need to be not just quick but consistently quick. Oh, and by the way, Sir Lewis Hamilton, somebody from Brembo and employees come out and talked about his problems and said that a lot of Lewis Hamilton's pace is being lost at the altar of confidence or lack thereof in the Brembo brakes. Lest we forget, Lewis Hamilton's always been a carbon industry guy, because those are the brake discs and pads that they use at the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth, aka Mercedes. Now it's a brand new circumstance for Lewis, isn't it? That the Brembo brakes don't give him the level of feel that he's used to. It is, of course, an acclimatization process. You heard me vent and go scorched earth earlier in the week, even at the altar of Lewis Hamilton. Still invested it in a very many extracurricular activities. The bloody fanatics opening, turning up at the Met Gala, etc. But Andrew Benson has been infinitely more balanced as far as his integrity and the length and breadth of his Sir Lewis Hamilton problem expose than I ever could. I'm going to read out some of them because it's important here. He talks in the first instance that Lewis Hamilton's season to date has been a tale of two halves. Benson says over the first 6 races, Lewis Hamilton was on average 0.2042 tenths slower than Charles Leclerc. He qualified ahead only twice, both sessions at the Chinese Grand Prix sprint. Since the Imola Grand Prix, continues Benson, in mid-May, Hamilton's average deficit to Charles Leclerc is just 0.078, less than 1/10, including his 2 recent difficult race weekends in Belgium and Hungary. The story, therefore, if you're talking about absolute terms, pacing qualifying, is that Sir Lewis Hamilton is converging upon the dude who some say is quickest point-to-point in Charles Leclerc. Techie. I didn't realise we spoke about that the other day, right? When I normalised for the anomaly that was Monaco, that there is potential there in Sir Lewis Hamilton's pace. However, Benson continues, could you assert reasonably that a driver might have lost it at some stage, as some had started to talk about Sir Lewis Hamilton, if indeed they are only 0.078 slower than arguably the fastest driver in the world? Of course not. Andrew Benson said the speed is there, but again, it's acclimatization. It's a brand new circumstance, but there is a trend. Chat, if past his prologue and Lewis Hamilton is 40 years old, Andrew Benson makes this assertion. In 2022, as versus George Russell, Sir Lewis Hamilton over the course of the season on average was 0.051 quicker than George. In 2023, George had the upper hand by 0.035, 4/100ths. In 2024, George Russell had the upper hand in qualifying, of course, by 0.2 rounded up. Charles Leclerc, thus far as the season to date on average, has had the upper hand by 1.5 tenths. The trend is your friend until there is a bend. The last time Lewis Hamilton was quicker over the course of a season than a teammate was George Russell in 2022. Now, correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation, but that, ladies and gentlemen, as a headline, is worrying, should be concerning. Benson continues, expounding upon the reasons, the whys and wherefores that you can attribute to Sir Lewis Hamilton's struggles in 2025. He writes, Hamilton previously would use the rise in rear ride height during braking and the subsequent shift in aerodynamic balance that generated more front grip to rotate the car. His ability to balance on the edge the limits of adhesion in the braking entry phase at higher speed than almost anybody else made him stand out. The cars introduced in 2022 have shaped underbodies using so-called Venturi tunnels to generate downforce through ground effect. They have to run low and stiff to work at their best. And this is the problem, right? It's one of adaptability. Andrew Benson goes on and starts talking about how your synapses don't work the same at the altar of adaptability when you get to the ripe old age of 40. And I think that's got something to do with this. He continues, Attacking corners in the way that Lewis Hamilton did previously doesn't work in this era. A different style is required. Drivers talk about the need to brake earlier and roll the speed into corners to best exploit the underbody performance. Lest we forget, in the ground effect era, 80% of your downforce will come from the underbody. The way in which the floor interacts with the tarmac, it's Venturi tunnels. Hamilton seems not to be able to adapt as readily as others to this, or at least, says Benson, has not been able to differentiate himself as much. But why? Until the last few years, after all, he was renowned for his adaptability. Hamilton's specific problem with Ferrari this year is that he is lacking the confidence in the rear during braking and at corner entry. Andrew Benson lays out his supposition this way. He says, age isn't just a number. If past this prologue, you've heard me trot out a gazillion occasions how many F1 drivers have won championships at the age of Sir Lewis Hamilton, 40 or older, 3. Brabham, 66. Fangio won his last one in 57. And Nino Farina won the first ever official F1 title in 1950. But Benson gets more forensic. He says this is important. Alain Prost was 39 when he won his last world title in 1993. He says that Alonso at the age of 41, he's talking Grand Prix wins now, not championships, that Fernando Alonso would have won his last one at the age of 41 had Aston Martin executed for the right pit stop choice, the right tyre choice even, at the right time in Monaco in 2023. But Mansell, Prost and Alonso all had breaks before their final stints. Lewis Hamilton has had no break. He's been going straight through. Mansell drove in IndyCar before coming back to F1 in 1992, 93. That Alonso, he explored for a couple of years of a formula, didn't he? Prost had an enforced sabbatical because he didn't want to drive for Ferrari anymore before embarking upon his final stint in 1993 at Williams. Benson says this then. This is why Hamilton is different at the ripe old age of 40 years old. That Hamilton has been in F1 non-stop for 19 years. 4 years ago, he had to suffer the blow of missing out on a record 8th title in the most controversial circumstance in Abu Dhabi. And he has not yet had a competitive car enough since to avenge what he regards as an injustice. Ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, it is chaos. Age is not just a number. Lewis Hamilton has been going hard for as near as makes no difference. 17, 18 years. 2007 was his first season. 0 breaks. Whereas all of the others in most recent Formula One history who have experienced some success or very nearly, they went on breaks. IndyCar for Mansell. Alonso went to go and explore other formula, take a chill pill. So too, Alain Prost had a year break before he went and had success. Lewis Hamilton has had 0 breaks. And I think, chat, Stephen, Daniel, I think, Andrew, that has to mean something. Again, if you're assessing Lewis Hamilton's performance in real time, you've got to normalise for these things. 40 years old and 0 breaks. Andrew Benson bookends the article this way, citing one Damon Hill, who said in 1996 when he won his championship, that shortly thereafterwards, he felt like he lost a 10th or 2 in pace. And then when you get to the end of your career, he says that it feels like a holiday. Not the beginning nor the middle portion of your holiday, but the final day of it. He says that when you're on holiday, your final day isn't really a holiday because you're just waiting to come home. That's the analogy, and I think it's a brilliant one. Maybe Sir Lewis is there, but maybe in 2026 he gets the car, he gets the handling dynamic of the 2021 cars again, no longer ground effect, and he can get his head around that handling dynamic and utilise what he's always utilised to optimise for his performance and be one of the best potentially that we've ever seen in F1 history. Mount Rushmore of F1, first round Hall of Fame, GOAT settings, potentially in 2026. Between now and next time, the prosecution will ask no further questions.